What's up, you guys? Void here coming back at you all with part 2 for Reasonable Commander reprints for 2018, where we have 10 cards that I think Wizards of the Coast could reprint pretty easily, either in Masters 25 or Commander 2018. Both would be okay. And none of these cards are going to be super expensive, like $50 and up. A lot of these are going to be around $15, $20, and definitely there's going to be some that are lower and maybe some that are higher than that, but for the most part, that is the range that we're going to focus on here. That way you could honestly see these being reprinted in a commander deck, or yet again a master set, which it's not confirmed yet that we're not going to be getting a master set later this year. We could still get one. I personally don't think that's such a good idea. Too many reprints isn't necessarily going to be good for the game. First card we have is Reliquary Tower. Pretty good staple, sees a play in so many commander decks, just about all of them. There are certain decks that don't need no maximum hand size, and there are certain commander decks that just think that Reliquary Tower is just another land that produces colorless mana and does nothing else for that deck. But it's around $4 to $6, which is still, a pretty hefty price for what the card actually is. It's a staple. It's just like Sol Ring. It's just like all these other good cards that are going to get reprinted multiple different times. It just seems that they're unwilling to reprint Reliquary Tower as often as they are going to be reprinting Sol Ring, Swiftfoot Boots, Lightning Greaves, those cards that are going to get reprinted in multiple different precons, because they're just good start out points for a lot of new players. So definitely reprint it in Commander 2018. You don't have to reprint it in Masters, so I think that's definitely where it belongs. All 10 of the Shocklands from Ravnica, original Ravnica block, and Return to Ravnica block. So you have all 10 of these. Honestly, you could just reprint all 10 of them in Masters 25, and I think that would be pretty fine. But you could honestly just throw all 10 of them into the Commander 2018 precon decks, and hopefully it doesn't just shoot up the price of them. If you keep the same print run as you did with 2017, I think you should be just fine. But this isn't like the same problem that you had with the Zendikar fetches, where a lot of them were super expensive. Like you had Scalding Tarn was over $100 at one point. For the most part, a lot of these are going to be in the $20 to $25 range, which is kind of the range I want to focus on here. So I think it's definitely within reason to reprint these. They see play in more than just Commander, obviously, but in Commander, these are usually go-to lands, especially when you want to optimize. They're great budget versions of the original dual lands, which are a lot harder to get, and they're on the reserve list. So if you can't take the dual lands off the reserve list, you might as well reprint lands that are definitely worse, because they do end up shocking you, but they're still just as good when it comes to searching them out with fetch lands, and they give that same mana fixing for a lot of the decks that care about getting the right type of mana. So great cards, definitely need them reprinted this year. Then we go on to our artifacts potential reprints here. We have Coalition Relik. Originally printed in Future Sight and then reprinted in the Phyrexia versus the Coalition dual decks. It is around a $12 to $13 card right now, which is pretty ridiculous. The card is, I wouldn't say an auto-include in every single commander deck, but it does give certain decks that extra bit of colored mana that they're looking for, and it gives you a way to potentially save up on your mana. If you want to play the setup game, you could definitely do that with this card. It is brilliant in something like, say, Atraxa, where you have a ton of proliferate effects, and you're able to add more charge counters onto it, and then later on in the game you can then remove those charge counters and get a ton of colored mana, which is what you want in Commander. A ton of colorless mana isn't bad, it just makes it harder to cast a lot of spells, because a lot of spells aren't just going to be generic mana only. So great to have Coalition Relic reprinted this year, and I think it could kind of be like a Chromatic Lantern reprint where they just put it in one deck. That way you incentivize the players to get one deck that may not have the best commander options, but it definitely has some good support cards like these. So definitely a good card to consider. Then we have Akroma's Memorial, another Future Sight card. This one was reprinted in the core set 2013, but it is still sitting at $17, which is incredible. And I used the comparison of Eldrazi Monument from Commander 2015. That was also reprinted. It's still going to hold some value, but Akroma's Memorial, yeah, for all intents and purposes, it's going to be a win con in certain decks, especially ones that can get out a ton of tokens or just creatures in general. It is definitely powerful. It gives you all these different awesome keywords, such as Flying, First Strike, Vigilance, Trample, Haste, and Protection from two pretty good removal colors in black and red. So you have ways of just making your creatures unstoppable there. It sees play in a ton of different decks, combat-based decks, artifact decks even love playing with this card. It is super powerful, and it's one of those cards that it doesn't see enough play because it is one of those more expensive cards that is closer to the $20 mark. Budget players don't necessarily need to work with this card when they have cheaper options that maybe aren't as good, but they definitely put in a lot of the same work. So it's a fantastic card. If they could reprint it in Commander this year, I think that would be great. And then we have Pact of Negation. This card is $25 to $30. It has a few different printings. It obviously has the masterpiece from the Amonkhet Invocations, which is around $50. You have the original Future Sight yet again. I think that's noteworthy. There are a lot of good cards from Future Sight that need reprints. And you also have the Modern Masters version, which is a little bit cheaper, closer to $25. But either way, the card is really expensive. And there's no doubt in my mind that Modern Masters, that reprint isn't going to hold up for too long, and they're going to need to reprint this card again. So why not reprint it in Masters 25? That's honestly the best place for it. But it's definitely one of those cards that you've seen this trend. You see Force of Will, you see Mana Drain. They're sort of the chase cards of the set. While I don't think Pact of Negation is anywhere near that range, it's definitely worth including into yet another Master set. It's just a brilliant card in Commander, not so much in any other formats, but as far as control decks go, it's one that I usually look to include when it comes to counter spells. It's just 0 mana for countering a spell. You have no other cost when it comes to casting it. You just have to hope that you have enough mana to pay that 5 your next upkeep. And next we have Mystic Confluence. Remember my last video when I said that a lot of the cards from older Commander sets are going to be spiking up, and they have. A lot of them are pretty expensive. This one is about $11, which is pretty insane. It doesn't see so much play in Commander. I mean, obviously you have preferable counter spells in the format. This one is basically a mana leak times 3 if you want to go that far. But you also have 3 different modes, so it's kind of like Cryptic Command. It does cost 1 more. It might be a little bit better, a little bit worse. It depends on how you interpret that, but gives you a lot of the same value that that card also gives you. But the big difference is it's not going to be as expensive as Cryptic Command. It still needs a reprint. I think if you have these cards in your Commander sets, you should feel obligated to reprint them in future Commander sets. So why not? There's another Confluence that's going to be on this list, which I'm going to get to later, but you just see this with a lot of good Commander cards in these specific precon sets that they have neglected to reprint, but they honestly should. I think it's kind of ridiculous, and a lot of expensive cards in the format are going to be blue anyway. If you're going to make new ones, you should at least consider lowering the price eventually. And then next we have Phyrexian Arena. Now, in all fairness, this card has been reprinted a whole bunch of times. It's been reprinted in dual decks, it's been reprinted in Plane Chase, but it's still a $5 card, which is enough to deter some people. It's enough to question whether or not this card is completely necessary for some people, but it's a brilliant consistency card. It's a no-brainer. If you had to ask me in any sort of black heavy deck for Commander 2018 if they're going to make a precon, there's no doubt in my mind that they should consider reprinting this in just about every single Commander precon they can from now until whenever they decide to stop making precons, because it is that good of a consistency card. It's not Sylvan Library range where it's too expensive, but it's definitely something that we need more of. It's kind of like Reliquary Tower. It's not too expensive. It's not something we have to have in a Masters 25 set as far as value goes, but when it comes to just good value reprints that are going to make the deck playable rather than just valuable, Phyrexian Arena, you can't really go wrong. And then we have the card I was talking about with Mystic Confluence, Fiery Confluence. This card is, believe it or not, even more expensive. It is about a $16 card, which is just ridiculous. I honestly don't even know why. I don't think I've seen it in too many decks, but it is a good card. It's a great card. You have 3 different modes, pretty much like Mystic Confluence. You can choose 3. You can choose the same mode more than once. You could deal 1 damage to each creature, deal 2 damage to each opponent, or destroy a target artifact. So right off the bat, I'm going to be thinking 3 artifacts for 4 mana in red is pretty good. Dealing up to 3 damage to each creature is also pretty good as well, and dealing 6 damage to each opponent isn't too shabby either. I think that's pretty good value. Now, there are a lot of decks where they want to have burn spells like these. They want to have good removal. This qualifies as both. It's a good card. I don't think it's one of those auto includes that I would consider cards like Pact of Negation Phyrexian Arena to be, but when you talk about just the card being too expensive, I mean, $16, it is one of those examples, yet again, of Commander pre-con cards that, just for the fact that they've been printed only once, is the main reason why they're expensive. So when it comes to keeping the card's value down just for affordability purposes, they should definitely feel obligated, because the other Confluences, we have Verdant Confluence, we have Righteous Confluence. Don't think I remember the black one, but I don't think that one's worth much either. Those are all around $1. I mean, kind of ridiculous, but the card has to be good if it's going to demand this type of price. So should definitely reprint a lot of the Confluences, if not all of them, again in Commander 2018. And then we have Vigor. From Lorwyn, this card has only been printed in Duels of the Planeswalkers, which was kind of a specialty set. That version is around $15. The Lorwyn version's around $16 to $18. It is pretty expensive, but it is a fantastic card in Commander. Yet again, if damage would be dealt to a creature you control, other than Vigor, so it doesn't really count itself, you prevent that much damage, and then you put that many +1/+1 counters on that creature for each damage prevented, which is just a ridiculous combo with Blasphemous Act. I've mentioned that before on my channel. Really ridiculous. You do have to shuffle it into your library if it would go to your graveyard instead, so that is a downside. It's not something you're going to easily recur again and again, but it's definitely something that I would consider for a lot of good decks, green decks, combo decks. It's a brilliant card. It's only been printed for the most part once. Duels of the Planeswalkers isn't something you're going to see a whole lot of, so the value of the card wasn't going to go down much from that reprinting, but the card hasn't been printed since Lorwyn. I mean, a lot of good cards from Lorwyn have had reprints. This one, for some reason, has not. It's around, again, $18. That's just way too expensive. I think it's time to reprint it. And then the last card we have is Privileged Position from Original Ravnica. This card has never seen a reprint since Ravnica. That is just ridiculous. It is around an $18 card. What it basically does for so many decks, it has the hybrid white-green mana, so you can throw it into a deck and not worry too much about the mana cost. But all of your other permanents can't be the targets of spells or abilities your opponents control, which is basically like asceticism but better, because it does it for all of your other permanents. This includes your lands, this includes your artifacts, your enchantments, your planeswalkers. It is ridiculous. It sees play everywhere. It's going to see even more play if it gets a reprint this year. Again, it could either see a reprint, I don't know if they're going to be willing to do it for Masters 25 when it comes to the draft, but for Commander 2018, wouldn't be surprised if we see some sort of enchantment heavy deck. I mean, a whole bunch of things combined, its playability and the fact that it hasn't seen a reprint since Ravnica, and we've had reprints of amazing cards like Doubling Season. I think it's about time we see it this year. So anyway, guys, that's going to do it for this video. Let me know what you think should be reprinted this year. I've yet to even scratch the surface when it comes to cards that could be reprinted. There are a whole ton, and there are a whole bunch of cards that are just great for Commander. And there are, of course, cards that are going to be worth a whole bunch, even over $50 cards that should be reprinted. But honestly, I want to set a reasonable expectation for Wizards of the Coast. So if you don't see a card on this list or in future videos, it's not that I don't want that card to be reprinted. It's just that I think it would be a lot easier for Wizards of the Coast to reprint all of the cards I have mentioned in this video and the video before. But as always, you guys have a wonderful day. Void here signing off. See you all next video.